My name is Frances Haugen. I used to work at Facebook. Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Stephen Rosenbaum. I am the Executive Director of the Sustainable Media Center and co-founder. Little bit of background on what we're going to do today. We have two amazing guests, and we're going to have a really crisp hour-long conversation. And you're all welcome to ask questions, raise your hand, jump into the chat. We want it to be very interactive since this is a group of people that knows a lot about this space. Having said that, I just want to give you a brief understanding of what this organization is. The Sustainable Media Center is a pioneering not-for-profit organization headquartered in New York and born out of a profound concern about the escalating impact of social media on young people. We recognize that the hate-for-profit advertising model and unchecked digital practices were jeopardizing the well-being of a younger generation. And SMC was established to bring about transformative changes in a more sustainable and digital positive future. So with that, we have an amazing board of advisors, board of trustees, and Gen Z partners spanning generations and expertise. SMC is fighting for meaningful change with core philosophical changes that are embracing intergenerational partnerships, actions, and co-creating a strong digital future where users have agency over their digital lives. If you're not already a member, please join. It's free. It's the SustainableMedia.Center, and we would love to have you as part of the organization. So with that, two guests. First, Zamaan. Zamaan Qureshi is an activist and advocate for a safer social media for teenagers and young people. He's the co-founder of Design It For Us Coalition and a member of the Sustainable Media Center Next Gen board. Qureshi is at American University senior and describes the current state of affairs as a mental health emergency driven by the addictive nature of social media. Together with his co-founder, Emma Lemke, the coalition has published an amazing 5 key principles that calls for specific change. Qureshi says, quote, Meta and Instagram cannot be trusted to keep our nation's kids safe. We'll publish in the show notes the key principles. You should definitely read them. And thank you, Zamaan, for being here. And our second guest is Frances Haugen. Frances is a technologist with an amazing journey. She worked at Google, Yelp, and her own startup before joining Facebook. She told us when we were last together in February that she felt compelled to take an active role in creating a better, less toxic Facebook and thought, quote, Facebook had the potential to bring out the best of us. That was back in 2019. She became a product manager there on the civic integrity team. But the more she saw, the less she was confident that Facebook would make critical changes without the state of affairs being made public. She ended up disclosing tens of thousands of Facebook's internal documents to the Securities Exchange Commission and the Wall Street Journal in 2021. Her book, which came out this year, is titled The Power of One, How I Found the Strength to Tell the Truth and Why I Blew the Whistle on Facebook. It's published by Little Brown. So thank you both. We are at a critical moment. I mean, I was thinking as I was thinking about talking to you, Frances, how much the world we care about has changed since February. I mean, no shortage.
In the last 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, certainly there's a whole series of, but I thought I would just start by asking this question. As you sat and watched Arturo, do people understand, other than you, the gut-wrenchingly difficult, life-changing moment that you decide to take on when you become both a whistleblower and a public persona? Like, what was it like to watch for you?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I had a conversation earlier today with someone who was a whistleblower for Twitter and not for Facebook. And one of the things that people never believe me when I talk about my experience was like, no one came for me, right? Like I still have open DMs on Twitter, X, Instagram. My email's up on my website. Like I don't get hate mail. Never did. Like for an outspoken woman on the internet, never get sexually harassed. But this other person, they went after Twitter, and Elon Musk has fanboys. Mark Zuckerberg does not have fanboys. And I think one of the things that Arturo and I have in common is like we both had narratives that like people can see why we did what we did. Right. So in the case of Arturo, like he went back to Facebook when he didn't have to, right? I'm sure he had plenty of money being at Facebook since 2009, like having the role he did. But he came back because his daughter, his 14-year-old was getting sexually harassed on Instagram, or worse. And for me, it was one of these things where like I had worked on at that point 3 social networks. I was easily one of the more people who had been deep in social for a long time. And I understood the responsibility of being someone who is a specialist in a field where like there's implications for democracy. And like people always love them from Iowa, and like my mom's a priest and things like that. And so Arturo has had a smoother whistleblow than probably a lot of people have expected too. Going after Facebook is not it's not going after the federal government. It's not going after one of the most popular people on the internet or most polarizing people on the internet. So I don't want to fan the mystique too much because I've had an easier go than many people have.
I wondered as I was listening to him about the
Yeah.
conversations he's had with his daughter, both before and after.
Oh yeah, yeah, unquestionably.
And Zamaan, I mean, for you and the community that you represent, I mean, the people that are talking about making changes aren't talking about it philosophically. They're talking about it because they're living it. And, I wonder if how you walk the line between saying, for example, among my Gen Z friends, there are all kinds of different points of view about Section 230. There is no Gen Z position on Section 230. In fact, it's quite divergent. What are there things? I mean, I assume both of you guys have talked about the 5 principles. Like, how aligned are you on those actions, and what pushback do you get from other people that say you're going about it wrong?
Well, I'm gonna check. I want to check the 5 principles because I actually haven't seen them yet. Like, keep talking, Zamaan. Sorry.
Yeah. So when we got wind, I think a couple hours prior, that the Wall Street Journal was going to go ahead with this story and that there was going to be a new whistleblower. And I kind of remember like waiting with anticipation to see what this story was going to be, and then reading it and feeling like a lot of feeling seen by a lot of the stuff that we were reading about, but not at all surprised. I wasn't reading something being like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. It was like, well, actually, yeah, the company knew that this was happening, and there are plenty of young people across the country who've been experiencing these things. And then when the lawsuit came out to this as well, the California consolidated lawsuit with the 33 states, and it kind of walks through step by step, year by year, when Instagram started to make product changes to try and hook younger and younger users. That was a big point of recognition for a lot of young people I spoke to, who looked at that timeline and were like, yeah, I remember what I was doing that year. And I remember when Instagram, turned from chronological to algorithmic, and, made these certain design feature changes when stories were implemented. And so I think it's fascinating then to fast forward and then read the new unsealed complaint in Massachusetts and see that stories, for example, was a huge hook for college students because people were worried that they were going to miss out on an opportunity to view a piece of content that would disappear in 24 hours. So I guess the bigger, broader picture is that I think a lot of us felt a sense of like this was our sort of digital time capsule encapsulated in these complaints and in the Wall Street Journal story and in Arturo Bejar's testimony. It's all kind of come to fruition over the past couple of weeks. And then Steve, you're trying to get at like, where do we go from here? Like, what are the solutions? Design It For Us put forward a policy platform a couple of weeks ago in which we lay out 5 key principles. I think the core of what we want to see is choice, simply designing online experiences to provide young people with more choice over their digital environment and their digital experience. We might disagree to the end of time about what to do about Section 230 or about what carve-outs are supposed to be here or there. But I think providing users more choice, there are some very clear and agreed upon policy solutions to make that happen that have broad bipartisan consensus, that have Gen Z consensus. And I think those are the things that we will continue to advocate for.
So I have a question for the folks that are watching. if unless you'd rather remain private, which is totally fine, would you mind turning your cameras on? And the reason is that when we do the post-production on this, having a group of people listening and then participating makes it a little more visual. So turn your cameras on if you would. And with that, we'll get back to, I know Francis, you had something to say.
I think you can abstract out a little bit. Like, so I rapidly read through your 5 principles. I think there's like a way to abstract out just slightly a bigger circle. So like a lot of the principles focus on privacy and control of data. I think there is a larger philosophical like opportunity to say, like, if we were going to design these software systems anchored in respect for people's dignity, like people are not means to an end, they are not objects, they're people. And the second is prioritizing consent, like autonomy, dignity, and consent. And so, yes, controlling your data is important, but also feeling like I can actually go to bed when I want to go to bed. Or like, do I regret my usage after I use this product? Or like how long I was on? Or does it, do I feel anxious about leaving? Like none of these things are really about, respecting people's autonomy or their dignity. And so, we have a really big opportunity in the next year or two where we were told by these companies, the only way to keep people safe is at the very end to pluck out the dangerous things. You see a bad thing, pluck it out. The reality is that we can look at the life cycle of lots of different harms. And one of the things I love about talking to Arturo is he thinks in that holistic way. He says, my nonprofit is working on diagramming those life cycles. You can push at a lot of places in that life cycle, from like when the person creates it to how it gets distributed to, the tools available when it's viewed, where you can make a big dent. It's not just about plucking things out. And I think giving people that hope that there are a lot of different ways to solve a problem. And we need to be doing defense in depth. And we can probably find things that we all find acceptable if we just got around a table and talked about it.
So there were no shortage of things in Arturo's testimony that I found fascinating, but I ended up sitting there, Francis, thinking about you, because, there was that famous CNN interview where they pre-butted your story and essentially argued with you before any of it had become public, and kind of damned you by saying, well, she wasn't really in the right department. She really, they cherry picked, and they had a whole series of kind of like sharp, kind of disrespectful ways they treated you. And now that you know that of the emails that Arturo sent both to Mark and to Cheryl, that becomes, at least for me, I was, maybe you don't jump to enragement as quickly as I do, but I was enraged for you. Like, wait, this wasn't like we didn't know this. And it was, and the issues were raised internally, and yet your political answer, your strategic PR answer, was to just damn the whistleblower and hope it goes away. I think your testimony has a different shape around it with his, put side by side.
Yeah, and I think it's also just one of these things where the ground was tilled, right? Like the attorney general is like, Zamaan mentioned that we got the unredacted complaint last week. Like we got to see actually like all the juicy little details that synthesized out of all these document requests. They say explicitly in both the federal filing and in the state ones, like this whole thing got kicked off because I brought a handful of documents out, right? Like there's probably 40 or 50 documents that deal with teen well-being. Most of my focus was on the international implications, the fact that Facebook is the internet for multiple billions of people, and they don't spend money on safety on running the internet for the most fragile places in the world. But even those 40 documents proved that Facebook had been lying, and it gave them the grounds to subpoena many, many, many more documents. And so the way I like to think of it is, one, hurt people, right? Like the people who hold those jobs of spinning stories for Facebook, it's not my job to attribute motivations to them, but like they are where they are. And two, the world is changing. That Arturo said explicitly, like part of why he sent the emails he did and the order he did and like the way he did things was he was living at Facebook while they were publicly denying that these things were true. And he wanted to make sure the document history was there. And so he was much better placed to make sure that those kinds of lines could never work. And he was a mature enough adult who understood consequences, where, like, you have to remember, easily 75% of all the technical employees at Facebook are, less than 5 years out from college. There's very few people who could have had the savvy that Arturo did to make sure that he pulled the levers in like just the right order, such that basically there's a irrefutable line now that senior executives knew this harm was happening. They tried to suppress it internally and they lied about it publicly.
So let's talk about this trajectory we were on. So first there was the Surgeon General's announcement. Then after that, you started to see kind of a rising tide of concern. The media paid attention for a moment and still does, but and there was we should track back to when the tobacco analogy started. But I'll tell you, I copied. So yesterday, the New York Times, the Daily, had a rather long, hour-long piece about the impact of essentially the tobacco, or the tobacco analogy. And Natasha Singer, who was the reporter, reached out to Meta and asked them to respond to the attorney generals. And I'm going to read you what they said, and then you guys can tell me how egregious it is. So this is a quote from the New York Times, or from the audio from the New York Times. She said, "So I reached out to Meta and I asked them what their response was to all these lawsuits. And they got back to me and they said, first of all, the company had made major and ongoing investments in protecting young folks on the platform, and that there were now more than 30 tools and resources to protect teens and help them be safe and away from potentially harmful content. They also said the state's complaint is basically cherry-picked. Meta said that the lawsuit was filed with selective quotes from a hand-picked set of documents, and they didn't provide real context to how the company operates or how the company makes decisions. And on the other issues, they pointed out that Instagram's terms of service prohibits users under the age of 13. And then finally, on the beauty filters, which were talked about, Meta said that it banned filters like that directly promote cosmetic surgery or extreme weight loss. And she said, I also asked them about a comparison between big tobacco that the attorney generals were making, and Meta said it was an absurd comparison. So that was like their laundry list of rejections. So let's just go through them one by one and start with the idea that they have they've built 30 tools to protect young people. Do either of you guys want to take a stab at the legitimacy of that as a defense?
I'm happy to let Zamaan go first. So I don't want to dominate the conversation. I do have opinions, but I'll let him go.
The first thing I saw when the Wall Street Journal published with Arturo's story, Meta spokesperson Andy Stone is the named spokesperson in there. And Andy Stone points to, we have turned on reminders to be kind in direct messages to stop some of the abuse and harassment and cyberbullying that we're seeing online. To me, like, that is a step. It's a tool, but it does not do any of the things to tackle the major issues that are outlined in some of these suits. And so the 30 tools that are available and accessible, in one of the complaints, there's so many now, it's hard to keep track of which one, but in, I believe, the Massachusetts complaint, it makes reference specifically to Facebook or Meta carrying out education of its own tools to its users. And it knows that if it educates its users about its tools, users are going to be more likely to engage with those tools versus not. And of course, a lot of the times, Facebook is not educating its users about its tools around, turning off certain defaults to protect your privacy settings or to turn on the strongest safety provisions in place. So it's kind of laughable to me that the spokespeople are out here sort of saying like, oh, well, we've done all of these things, on top of the fact that you have people like Nick Clegg, very senior people inside the company, who are flagging to Mark Zuckerberg, we need to invest, we need to invest, we need to invest in youth safety, we're not doing enough. While he is on television talking to everyone about how we're doing enough in investment in youth safety, right around the time, mind you, that Frances Haugen was testifying around these issues. So I think it's absurd that this notion out here of like Meta trying to paint a different picture of reality, but it's completely in line with the way that they have dealt with scandals in the past. If you go back to 2018 around Cambridge Analytica, the same spokesperson, Andy Stone, and the folks inside Facebook who were running comms around that time were actually cited in the SEC complaint for misleading reporters around the scandal itself. So this is not new. This happens time and again. And I think it's really important to A, name spokespeople because they're representatives of the company, and B, to fact check them the way that I think Brian Fung did at CNN really well in his coverage of the lawsuit and the complaint.
So I think you can divide the actions that Facebook does into two categories. One are effective interventions, and one are, to quote Arturo, placebo interventions, which I think is such a beautiful turn of phrase, because that is what they are. They're performative, the vast majority of them. If we were to look at the ones that are effective, right there, so there are some things where when they list those 30 features, they'll be like, look what we did. We default young people into the most private options. And they ignore the fact that like the reason they do that is, and when they turned it on, it was the day the age appropriate design code went into effect in the UK. So maybe a couple of months before I came forward, the UK law raising the floor in the UK for like what is safe for children went into effect, and Facebook around the world changed a whole bunch of features. And now they brag about the fact they did those features. They don't get credit, like they were forced to do those. The second is like when we look at most of those 30 features, Arturo did a really good job in his Senate testimony of articulating what would you hope to see if you were engaging in a good faith design process versus what do you actually see. So Arturo's methodology is different than what Facebook traditionally has done in that he actually asked people. I said, have you experienced identity-based hate? Have you had an unwanted sexual contact? Have you been bullied? He asked them directly because Facebook had been measuring what was success by like trying to detect these quite amorphous behaviors, right? Like the act of being sexually harassed might actually be many messages, not one. The act of being bullied is the aggregate often of like the actions, not a single message. And he found that, in some cases, they were only detecting 0.02% of some harms, right? Like functionally nothing. And he said in his Senate testimony, if you actually cared about having effective interventions and not placebo interventions, your success metric would be, we asked people, did you get sexually harassed in the last 7 days? And fewer people said yes. Like that's what success would look like. And I want to call out another example of how Facebook acts and actually meaningfully changes their product only when they are forced to. So I always like to do this as like an interactive thing. What year did Instagram start asking its users how old they were? Anyone can guess. What year? Too passive. Come on, people, I need guesses. And Zamaan and Steve don't get to participate. So someone in the audience. You said again?
2004.
2004. So they were founded. They were founded in like 2010, 2011. So those are too early. But give me another one.
When they were acquired?
Nope. More recently. Come on, folks.
In the chat, Laura is saying 2020.
So 2019 is when they started asking new users what their age was, but they already had, hundreds of millions, if not billions of users, right? So, and they were like 6 and 8 year olds that signed up, they were still under 13. They did not start asking those users, like all their users, how old are you? Until after they were asked for comment on the Wall Street Journal articles about my disclosures, right? So 2021. A week before the article started coming out. So you can come up there and say, under 13-year-olds aren't allowed on our product. And it's like, when you're forced to, so it's one of these things where we cannot take them on good faith. Like the era of just trust us is over. And if we are going to have to see a world where, Facebook has to publish, like, what are you trying to do to reduce these problems? And how are you going to measure it? Like, we have to talk about how you're going to measure it. Because again, to quote Arturo, there's just so many good sound bites from that Senate testimony. We are only going to get good products when Facebook, when they do their quarterly earnings, also has to report this fraction of girls under the age of 16 said they had an unwanted sexual contact in the last 7 days. Unless they have to report those numbers, the numbers will not go down.
Yeah. In the world of cognitive dissonance, the fact that the state attorneys general suit dropped on Tuesday and Wednesday morning was the quarterly report. And, clearly the state's attorney generals could have chosen to file that whenever they chose to. So they made a strategic decision that they wanted that story to align with the earnings report. The problem was the earnings report was so spectacularly up that was all anyone covered. I mean, they covered the state attorney general story, but like people were like, but look at the numbers. And, to your point, if the numbers were, oh yeah, by the way, look at all the money we earned hurting children.
Yeah.
It would take on a different character. So here's a place where I think there's some, I don't know if it's a disagreement, but, there are lots of state actions going on about giving parents more control and, of their teens' digital lives. Francis, how do you feel about, like, New York State there are a whole bunch of different governors moving proposals through. Do those solve the problem for you or help?
There's a lot of subtlety in parental notification or parental permission laws. I am a bigger fan of blanket age gating. Like the data is very clear on, you can have a kid on social media between the ages of 10 and 13, and they can stop using social media. They can still pick it up in things like MRIs, and other kinds of scans when that kid is 16, right? Remember, these are network-based problems. Like a single kid or a single family can't say, I want to spend more time in person with my friends if all their friends unless their friends make the same choice at the exact same time, right? Like the idea that these are individual choices is really, I think, not accurate. So I'm a big proponent of saying, if we went back 30 years, the only 10-year-olds who had to worry about their permanent brands, right? Like the idea of like, how do I look? How do I dress? How do people perceive me? What's the story I'm telling them my life? We're child stars, right? And I think all of us know what the average life arc is of a child star. Like the fact we're seeing kids who are really depressed and anxious and have these other mental health issues, it doesn't seem that surprising given the context. And so I'm a big proponent of age gating. I don't like the proposals that remove privacy. So like, I think you can have things like telling parents like, hey, your kid has been exposed to self-harm content, but you shouldn't go in there and say you can look at their stream, right? Like there's different ways you can do these interventions where you can still say kids can have, or like, 16 to 18-year-olds, 14 to 18-year-olds can have some privacy, but parents can still be aware when they need to maybe step in and have a conversation. Oh, I think you're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Zamaan, where do you come in on that?
Yeah, I think that there's an obvious role for parents to play here in terms of helping young people understand how to use social media safely, and also understanding the tools that are available to them, and sort of working together in tandem to figure out what a safer or more privacy focused experience looks like. I mean, I think there's a misconception, though, that like if we just put all the onus on parents, that parents will, suddenly be able to figure everything out for them. Parents are very smart people, but we've grown up with these technologies. If you put into place just sort of blanket bans on social media for anyone under the age of 18, people are going to find a way around. And find a way onto the internet, find a way onto these social media platforms. And so
Zamaan, the thing I just want to fact correct on that is I don't think that's true, right? Like it's one of these things where we have facial ID technologies now where you can on device. So we're not saying you're going to send your picture to the server. You're saying on device, you can get within half a year. It's things like how kids hold their phones, how they type, what content they engage with. There's lots of things. if we cared about keeping under 13-year-olds off these products, we would keep all the under 13-year-olds off these products. And I'll give you one last example. Kids report each other to punish each other, right? So like, you're mean to me at recess, I'm reporting your Instagram account, you're gonna lose it. You only need to have 1,000 of those kids, 5,000 of those kids do that, and you find all the other kids. And so I don't assume that, like, if we wanted to have a wall, the wall would not keep out 99.5% of kids.
Yeah,
I guess
yeah. No, I mean, it's a good
Yeah.
point. I think but I guess my broader point is implementing these kinds of like sort of draconian bans is not I think the way to go about this from my perspective, from the folks that we've worked with. I think that there's a lot to be learned from, and to Francis's point, like, if all of your peers are online and you're the one who's left out, there's a sense of like social ostracization there, that is part of the reason that Instagram knows that people are not going to all of a sudden leave one day because they see a piece of content that they feel bad about themselves on. I think that there's definitely ways that policy can help bring parents to play a more active role in the conversation, but to expect parents to be able to sort of like have to go around and granting consent on each and every platform and having to decide which one is safe and constantly looking over your shoulder, trying to decide which piece of content is safe and which isn't. I just don't think that that's feasible for the average everyday American family. And so that's where I see the risks coming in around a lot of these proposals.
I'll just
Can I get one
Yeah,
more
yeah.
thing? Sorry. So there was a lawyer working on one of the children's lawsuits who is a lesbian, who someone asked, talked about this question of like, what's the consequences of saying, like, for social media, maybe you can consume it, but you can't create it until you're 16, or maybe it's full on, like, we can't keep, we're just gonna, we have age gated spaces in society. Like, the idea that like we wouldn't have like that we can't have them online is like kind of absurd. And what she said was, I have not heard a case for what it is that social media provides that is not replaced by something else on the internet, right? Like, she was like, I discovered I was gay on the internet before social media, right? There are chat rooms, there are other ways, there are blogs, there are things where we're not asking computers to focus our attention. Like, we're not asking algorithms to direct us. We're not asking people to become little mini celebrities, right? I think there's interesting questions around, like, when should you start changing people's brains? Because thinking constantly about self-presentation changes your brain. It changes how you think about the world, yourself, and others. And it's become so ubiquitous that it may not even be obvious to people who had to spend. They got peer pressured into spending their formative years doing that.
It's interesting. You're making a really good distinction. There's a difference between when you give your kids phones and when you give your kids access to certain tools or certain environments, and when you give your kids access to social media. Those are all different gates. I'll just tell a story. I was on a plane coming back from a conference 2 weeks ago, and sitting next to me was a mom, and sitting next to her was a car seat with a toddler, maybe 2 years old. Before we took off, she handed him her phone and a big set of headphones. And what I found interesting was, I don't know about you guys, but when the plane takes off, you feel the pressure of the plane going up in the air. And I'm still moderately thrilled by this idea that I'm no longer on the ground for a moment. He did not notice. He was on his phone.
Wow.
The plane took off. He was on his phone. He was playing a game. We flew for 2.5 hours. He didn't stop. As we were landing, she took the phone away from him. He screamed bloody murder, and she gave the phone back to him.
I've watched this. This is a repeated story.
No judgment. I've learned I never judge parents. Kids are different. Parents are different. And Zamaan, to your point, it's like some parents,
and planes are hard.
Don't have and they're worried about the other people sitting near them, and we used to bring all kinds of stuff for our kids to distract them from upsetting the neighbors. But I think the idea of a one-size-fits-all solution that says at this age they're ready for X is going to be, Zamaan said kindly, all parents are smart. I can tell you that not all parents are smart. Not all parents understand the internet. All right, I want to go to an audience question. So Laura Berghole is on. She works with Sandy Hook Promise, and she had a question. Laura, go ahead.
Hi. So thank you. We just released a report on a campaign called Untargeting Kids, which is looking at how firearm marketing is targeting young people on social media and across various platforms, but social media, the worst. And we set up some 13-year-old accounts on Instagram, Google, and TikTok, and tracked what was coming into those sort of organically, TikTok being an insane example of how quickly that firearm content got on. But all of them you could have access to. When you're searching for content in those platforms, you can't find alcohol brands, and you can't access cigarette brands, and you can't access suicide content. So they know how to monitor content on some things that are sort of widely believed to be verboten, right? But apparently firearm marketing, firearm content, not in that category yet. So a lot of questions, and maybe I can follow up with some of you later, but we're having a really hard time identifying the link between firearm companies and paid influencers. We know they provide product to a lot of these influencers, and they likely do paid placement, but it doesn't indicate paid placement. So it's hidden information that I think could be very useful to us legislatively and otherwise. How do we find that information? How do we know? I mean, there's a lot of smoke. How do we identify where the fire is starting?
Well, from a legal perspective, if they are receiving any kind of in-kind, like free product or things like that, they have to disclose it. And so what I would say is, given the Biden administration is in office right now, it might be interesting to reach out to the FTC and just say, like, hey, we have noticed a trend that none of these influencers seem to have gotten anything for free. It's very, very peculiar when you think about it. Usually people who have 100,000 followers or whatever it is, like, they get free stuff. And yet none of these people seem to get free stuff. Because I think if it came from like an official, if there was a little bit of like a, make examples of some people, like more of them would then begin to show that they had paid placement.
We had a
other way to
conversation.
track paid placement other than through the influencer who's paid?
Yeah.
Can you track it through the companies? They don't acknowledge that, right? They don't track it. They don't.
Well,
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
We had a conversation with one tech company about this problem in particular, not necessarily about firearms, but about influencers getting products, and basically it's happening off the platform. And so whatever, payments are being made from the wholesaler or the retailer to the influencer, the tech company or the social media platform can't really know what's going on in those conversations. And they're sort of equally as worried about it, because they're like, well, you're saying that you're marketing on our platform, but they are not really like heavily able to police in that area. So they're sort of more concerned, or as concerned, I think, as you are. I don't really have a good answer for that, though.
Thanks.
So I want to just go back for a second. So Facebook just came out with its response to the attorney generals, along with some things that they say that they'd be willing to do. I know you guys don't necessarily think it is a panacea, but I'm just, from both of your perspectives, how does Facebook's response rank? And I know, Francis, you seem to think that that the AGs got some of what they wanted out of that.
I don't even know if it's a question of like they've already gotten what they want out of it. I can just imagine that, like, if generally, like, if we roll back in time to Purdue Pharma, so that's opiates, or the tobacco lawsuit, these were not lawsuits that were settled in court. They were settled in settlements. And that's kind of one of the unique things about the United States. Like, when I talk about our settlement process in other countries, people are just like, because it's not normal. Just as always with American things, sometimes we have to remind each other. Other people can pass laws, do regulations. So the standard process is they present the giant pile of evidence that you are totally screwed. Like, you read the unredacted filings, like, that is a paper trail. You have an incredibly senior engineering manager, Arturo, like, giving you beautiful, clean testimony about like what he did, what he saw, who knew what when. There was a document request just yesterday where the Senate said, hey, you have sent a lot of executives to talk to Congress. You have said the following things. we would like all the emails related, like all the documents, all the emails related to everything Arturo said. You know, I'm sure they, just like with Cambridge Analytica, they offered a settlement. And the fact that Facebook for the first time, like Facebook has never come out before and said, we need a law that keeps all under 16-year-olds off the platform. Right? Like I've never seen them come out and say that. They always say it's time for regulation. You know, they never give any specifics. And, you know, let's just think for a moment. Let's say Facebook does get forced to sign a settlement. If no one else has to sign that settlement, basically the death knell for the company has been signed, right? If other social media platforms can take kids that are 13, that are 10, you know, you're going to see a generational shift. And it will take a long, long time for Facebook to not be a company. Remember, they are the internet. They are the internet for billions of people outside the United States, but their role in the United States would change. And so I think that's that's the tea leaves I'm reading, is they're like, oh shit, like we are going to have to bargain away some of this. We might as well get in front of it and use our huge lobbying funds. Because remember, they spend more on lobbying than any other single company other than Amazon. It's like a top 10 spend. Everyone else above them is like a trade organization. You know, it's like all the realtors, the Chamber of Commerce, you know,
70 million a year,
people.
right? It's like 70.
It's huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's one of these things where, like, imagine they turned that money from obstruction to, okay, everyone else is going to have to sign the same settlement that we did. So that's kind of my read on it.
All right, we're going to go to the question. We're going to go to the questions we're going to ask Mark in a second, but go ahead, Zamaan.
Yeah, so I think a couple things on this. I agree with Francis. If we kind of look back at the track record on the way that Facebook has dealt with other lawsuits, other investigations, specifically around Cambridge Analytica, you know, they rushed to settle with the FTC and the SEC for a lot of money. They also settled in a pretty major class action suit in the state of California around Cambridge Analytica as well, because it was approaching deposition time for some of the senior executives in the company. And you had discovery coming out in this case that was damning, you know, every time a new document was put forth and released and then unsealed to the public. I mean, I think completely agree with Francis. I've never seen Meta state for the record about any laws that should be passed in the United States related to kids and teens, privacy, safety, etc. It's always been, they made these very glitzy ads that, you know, we haven't updated internet regulations in over 25 years. And it was all the things that had happened over 25 years. And then, you know, executives would line up in front of Congress and say, you know, we need internet regulations, and then kind of just hold their hands up and say, well, we're not really sure which ones. We look forward to considering your proposals. And I think that the key here right now is that we actually do have proposals in the United States Congress, the Kids Online Safety Act, for example, that has a lot of momentum to move forward right now. They could be supportive of that measure. Of course, they're not going to be, but they could be supportive of that, given the momentum it's garnered in the Senate and the possibility that it can move to the House in the next couple of months. So I think that I see the response as something of a panic option right now, as trying to get out in front of the story, as we've seen time and again with the company trying to do this. And I think really the bigger, broader picture at the end of the day is that these lawsuits are going to reveal information over time if they continue to move forward. We're going to see discovery from these cases. We're going to see more of those complaints unsealed. We've only seen one unsealed in Massachusetts. So if we see more, we're going to see more evidence. And the more evidence we see, the better picture we're going to be able to paint about what executives knew, when and why they made the decisions that they made. But from a bigger, broader picture, for me, from our Gen Z perspective, I think it just galvanizes more young people who are like looking at this bigger issue and saying like, hey, that's me. That's the experience that I had. And wait, those are the product changes that the company made that affected my life in these various different ways. And those are going to galvanize more activists to come forward and say like, this is my experience. This is my story. The company's not doing anything to change it. I'm seeing this in my own experience. I'm seeing this in my friends, in my siblings, in my cousins. You know, we need outside forces to take a stand here and implement some safeguards in. So that's the trajectory that I see.
All right, Kevin, you're up.
Yeah, my name is Kevin Wassing. I run a company called Intake Advisors, which is a marketing services firm. I also am the founder of the Media Advisory Board for Sandy Hook Promise. And our focus has been to change the narrative of gun violence in the country, but more towards, and first of all, thank you, both of you, for the work that you're doing and speaking up about things. This is more of a question for Francis. I actually wrote an article that I did post a little while ago. I waited, and unfortunately, until my mom passed away. It was called "How Facebook Stole My Mother," and essentially, it is about the algorithm and what Facebook does psychologically to people. And I don't think people understand how Facebook actually works. So what is it that's being told in the marketplace today, not just for kids? And by the way,
Yeah.
I built a multiplayer game for kids in 2007. We had 600,000 registered kids. And it was actually, I take that back. We had 600,000 registered parents. The parents had to register and be verified before their kids could actually use it. But what's being done to address that component of it, the broader component? I know that we're talking about, Gen Z and younger kids, but this is impacting generations of people in a very profound way. So what if anything is being done to address that?
I would say that, this is one of these things where I'm always a little hesitant to like rush to blame things on social media. Like I think often factors are like coincident or like they feed on each other. So something that we have seen since the 70s is a fraying of our in-person social fabric, right? So people go to church less often. They don't have garden clubs. They don't go to bowling leagues. Like there's just less of that public infrastructure. When you combine people who might be a little isolated, right? So like older adults often have a little bit more trouble moving. They might be a little more financially constrained. There's a natural fear sometimes, like, if you're a little frail, like, someone might hurt you, right? Like I was shocked when my grandfather got mugged one day at the grocery store. All these things push people to socialize online because it's cheaper, it's more convenient. And the problem with that is that, a great deal of research has shown that when people have these frayed in-person social networks, when we're alone at home, it makes us both more vulnerable to things like conspiracy theories. It makes us more willing to embrace, maybe communities that what we would describe as not part of our consensus reality. And the problem is that the algorithm just knows that it's trying to keep you engaged. Right. There's going to be a bunch of things that come out over the next. Sorry, I flew in on a red eye string, and actually have to head out in a few minutes because I have a hard stop. There's going to be, if you go and type into Instagram, I want to die. You could imagine most people who type that actually want help, right? Like long before people actually self-harm, they want help because they don't want to actually self-harm. And yet the content you get is largely stuff that glorifies self-harm. And so in a world where we trust computers to direct our attention, we will get more and more of the extreme stuff because these algorithms don't understand the significance of any of it. And there's ways to design it to try to make them less extreme, or things like consumer rights. Like I don't understand why we haven't tried doing a consumer rights bill on things like you have the right to reset an AI. You shouldn't have to choose between giving up your friends, giving up your photos, your memories, and like getting a brand new algorithm because you've noticed the algorithm thinks you're someone different than you want to be or you are. Like we don't have any of those rights today, but we could. And so my hope is that we'll begin by talking about change with regard to kids, and then that will make it more and more acceptable for us to talk about the idea of these are common spaces, this is public infrastructure. The idea that we're just going to optimize it for revenue and profit is ridiculous. Oh, you're muted.
So we have just a couple minutes left. I thought what we would do is just for both of you, presume that these videos are going to be up and floating around in the world. Both Zamaan and Francis, a question or two that you would pose directly to Mark Zuckerberg if he were sitting across from you today.
I'll let Zamaan go first. Unless you don't know your question, I know what I would ask him.
You go first.
Okay, good. So I would ask him, hey, dude, you are not happy, right? You're not happy. You're going on public things, like on public podcasts and saying things like, when I look at my phone in the morning, it feels like getting punched in the face. You're not happy. You have functionally infinite money. You are a smart person. Like, you are so young. Like, you're like, I think you might be 40. You're like really close to there. It's like 39, something like that. Why don't you go out and pursue greatness, right? Like, you're still going to get dividends from Facebook. You know, you can do anything. Is this the hill you want to die on? Like, go solve malaria, go like fix climate change. Like, you can do it. Like, why don't you just go pursue greatness? So that'd be my question for him. Because unless he leaves, it's not going to change. So, you know, hurt people. Let's go let someone new take the reins.
Yeah, I mean, Francis hit the nail on the head, but basically, why hire people if you don't let them do their jobs? I mean, Zuckerberg hired babysitters essentially to help guide him and his college roommates through the exploratory possibilities of what the Facebook could be. And those babysitters are in the room to guide Mark and tell him what he should be doing. And so then those people say, hey, look, Mark, we think you should be doing this. And he turns around and says, no, that's not something we're going to be doing. Despite repeated pressure, repeated data, repeated investment, and people are kind of turning around in the company and like shrugging their shoulders. Like, what do we do next? How do we go about this? How do we make our product safer? So yeah, I mean, I'm like, how do you want to be remembered in this, I guess? How do you want your narrative to be told as this story unfolds? The writing is on the wall, kind of. We've already started with the big tobacco analogies. Like, are you going to be that guy? Are you going to be the CEO, the big tobacco CEO, the big tech CEO? Do you want to be remembered that way? And then finally, like your own kids, you know, these executives, they come and testify before Congress. They talk all about their family. They say, you know, I'm a parent, I'm a father, I'm a mother. I care about my kids. I care about the way social media impacts my kids. So what? Like, what about everyone else's kids? You know, it's all good and well you being able to take away your kid's phone because you know how damaging your own products can be to your kids. What about everyone else's kids?
So let me throw a different name out there for you to ask a question of, who's in a very different position to both of your points. What question would you ask Sheryl Sandberg today?
Oh, again, I know what I'd ask.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Sheryl left the company under very suspicious circumstances, right? Like, when she left, like, usually when executives leave, they throw like festivals for them, right? Like, even when Amit Singhal left, he left under bad circumstance. So he was the guy who basically did search quality at Google. You know, he at least sexually harassed a lot of women, perhaps worse, and he still got a festival, right? So Sheryl left. She kind of snuck out the door. They said she used company resources to plan her wedding and to promote her second book. Her second book was an infomercial for Facebook. It was literally like, I survived my husband dying because I had Facebook groups. And it came out like right when Cambridge Analytica was like that year of horrible news. It was like the only good news for the company. The idea that spending company resources promoting it was bad makes no sense. I want to know, is she going to testify against Mark? Right? Like what happened? Like, I've been assuming that the email trail chain ends with her. And one of the things that Arturo brought forward was that when he contacted all the executives, the email chain ended with Sheryl, right? Like, the person who wrote back when he gave the horrible stats about, you know, 1 in 18 girls having an unwanted sexual contact in the last week. Sheryl wrote back. So I want to know, did you snitch on Mark I got the popcorn. I'm eating the popcorn. Tell me, Cheryl.
Yeah, it's a great question because Sheryl Sandberg was so many times the person in the room who was calling the big shots just below Mark. And so, I mean, I think it's fascinating to think about not only the way that she exited, but the sort of the years that have preceded since she's left. So how does she think about everything that's happened, and how does she think about her impact on the company and this company's impact on the rest of the world? This was a woman who is at one point being talked about as a potential presidential candidate, somebody with huge potential aspirations in politics in the Democratic Party. Like, how do you reflect on your time inside Facebook? And now thinking about the young people who have been impacted by social media in a really perverse and negative way. And how do you kind of live with that experience, knowing that you have the time and the distance from the company to be able to speak up and to be able to make a claim and give your statement and offer some respite to the country, to parents, to kids about social media's harms, about Instagram's harms? Where do you, when are we going to hear from you, Cheryl?
So I just want to wrap things up by saying I think we're all deeply appreciative of the work that both of you do. We would love to be as supportive as we can be. We think that what you're doing, both of you, is incredibly important. And thank you, Francis, Zamaan. Thank you both.